Four, three, two, one. Hello and welcome. We are live, people of the world. Marketing as a foreign language, episode 98. The big news today is that Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey admits that he handled a blocked post article regarding the Bidens. He says it was unacceptable. We're going to hit that story from two angles. Facebook, Twitter making editorial decisions to limit distribution of story claiming to show smoking gun emails relating to Biden and his son. In related news, what Kayleigh McEnany has said after her Twitter account was locked. I think this has something to do with that as well. YouTube following Facebook in banning QAnon, which is big news. We covered that yesterday. They said that they wouldn't, and now they're changing course. And LinkedIn Marketing Solutions looking ahead on the business side. Last but not least, Google, Facebook, and Apple in the crosshairs as lawmakers agree in the European Union for some sort of intervention. That is what's on the docket today, folks. Let's get started. Hey everybody, the intersection of politics and social media is unavoidable, especially in October of an election year. So here we are. Twitter CEO admitting he handled the blocked post article, saying it was unacceptable. We're live 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every Monday through Friday. If you want links to the articles we're going over, they're right there in the description. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, according to the New York Post, said it was unacceptable that the social media giant blocked users from sharing a post expose about Hunter Biden's emails. So he said, Twitter CEO, that it's unacceptable that he and the folks at Twitter blocked users from sharing this post without providing a clear message as to why. So we covered this in a previous episode where we said, hey, look, Twitter's going to be fine. Facebook's going to be fine if there isn't a consensus of folks on the platform that feel as though they are being censored and they're not allowed to talk. It's kind of the equivalent of if you're in a classroom where you're there by your own will, right? You're not getting a degree. You're there for the learning, whatever. And you raise your hand and you just never get called on. You're not allowed to speak. You don't get a turn. So I think we're a far cry from that currently on Twitter. However, I do think that Facebook and Twitter, in an effort to be the adults in the room, occasionally step over that line. Dorsey released his statement in a tweet Wednesday night, hours after a number of high-profile Republicans, including Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican from Missouri, blasted the social media giant for blocking the stories from being shared on the platform. Quote, our communication around our actions on the New York Post article was not great, and this is from New York Post, and blocking URL sharing via tweet or direct message with zero context as to why we're blocking is unacceptable. This is from Dorsey in a tweet. So yes, it would appear to me that they know that they made a mistake. I am not against Twitter blocking content that they think is misinformation. I think they're going to get it wrong a lot of the time. I don't know the facts on the ground on this particular matter regarding the email that everyone's tweeting about. Twitter blocked users from sharing an article that indicated Hunter Biden introduced his father, Joe, to a Ukrainian businessman, charging that hacked materials were used in that particular story. So Twitter saying, yep, we made a mistake. I think the mistake that they're admitting to is simply that they need to provide better context. Let's hit this story from another article, this time from CNBC.com. Facebook, Twitter make editorial decisions to limit distribution of story claiming to show smoking gun emails related to Biden and his son. This from Salvador Rodriguez. Key points of this article: Facebook and Twitter decided to limit the distribution of a New York Post story that claims to show the smoking gun. The editorial decision to reduce the spread of the story, which provides minimal evidence, is a significant one for Facebook, and the social media company has long professed to stand for freedom of speech. We've talked about this a whole lot. Again, I think in the maturity of Facebook to becoming the adult in the room, they are making decisions that are going to make a lot of people very upset and perhaps rightfully so. I think we have to take it on a case-by-case basis. So let's look at this case in specific. Facebook and Twitter on Wednesday limited the distribution of a New York Post story. We just read an article from them where Jack Dorsey apologized for not giving more context. While I will intentionally not link to the New York Post, this is a quote, I want to be clear that this story is eligible to be fact-checked by Facebook's third-party fact-checking partners, tweeted Andy Stone, a spokesman for Facebook. In the meantime, we are reducing its distribution on our platform. Now, I don't know if this story is true or not. I'm certainly not an uninvestigative political journalist, so I simply don't know. What I do know is that Facebook is willing to reduce the distribution of a post that they feel might be incorrect. And that level of power is pretty astounding. They're not saying that they're going to get rid of it. They're just saying, you know what, we're just going to reduce its distribution on our platform until we get the facts. So to what extent is that a reasonable thing for Facebook to do? Again, as a private company, they can do whatever they want. But as their power surges, another article we're going to talk about today is the EU taking a look at the monopoly or duopoly. If you look at like Facebook, Instagram, are they too powerful? The unverified story alleges then Vice President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, attempted to introduce a top executive at a Ukrainian company Hunter Biden worked for to his father. So, quote, investigations by the press during impeachment and even by two Republican-led Senate committees whose work was decried as not legitimate and political by a GOP colleague have all reached the same conclusion, that Joe Biden carried out official U.S. policy toward Ukraine and engaged in no wrongdoing. Trump administration officials have attested to these facts under oath. According to Bates, a spokesman for the Biden campaign, the New York Post never asked the Biden campaign about the critical elements of the story, he added. So the fight is going to go on. I encourage you to take a look at the facts of this case to get a sense of the back and forth on this. I guess from a social media perspective, my takeaway is that Facebook feels compelled to be the judge. They're going to limit the distribution of items like this while they do their own independent investigation. And if that doesn't sound like the police to you or government to you, then I'm not sure what will. They are going to have their own independent investigation of what's really going on here before they allow that information to proliferate, which just goes to show you how important and decisive this kind of information is, especially in October of an election year. So now moving on to Kayleigh McEnany, this is from Newsweek.com. She said that her Twitter account was locked, and this is her take on that. White House press secretary, think about that. Press secretary of the United States of America, Kayleigh McEnany, has said on Twitter, quote, they had me at gunpoint, she says, after allegedly temporarily locking her out of her personal account. She says she lost access to her Twitter account on Wednesday because she shared a story published by the New York Post, which claims that Joe Biden's son again. So the ramifications of this is pretty crazy. So what's the truth of the matter here? I don't know. I don't know if what they're alleging is true or not. I'm interested in what the social media sites are doing in reaction to it. Quote, if they can ban the press secretary of the United States for President Trump, they can ban a citizen. And that is pathetic, Ms. McEnany told Fox News' Sean Hannity after reportedly being locked out. Quote, it's not a temporary blockage. When I log into my Twitter account, it says I'm permanently banned. They essentially had me at gunpoint and said, unless you delete a news story reported by the New York Post, I cannot regain access to my account. So if this story from the New York Post is incorrect, if it is misinformation, if it's wrong, then Twitter is shown in a certain light. And if it is right, then McEnany is shown in a certain light. So it really boils down to the legitimacy of that particular post. How true is it? So there's going to be a lot of fervor over this. Twitter blocking the press secretary of the United States account. That's a big deal. Again, it really comes down to whether or not it was misinformation, what was being shared. And I think time will probably tell on that. It's going to be a little bit foggy, I think, in the near term to try to understand what exactly the truth is here. But as long as it stays in the news, we'll be following it. Yesterday, we talked about YouTube not banning QAnon, but being willing to not run ads for anti-vaxxers. Now we're looking at YouTube following Facebook in banning QAnon, but with caveats. This from DetroitNews.com. YouTube will ban videos that promote QAnon and other conspiracy theories, but only if they target specific people or groups, seeking to crack down on potentially dangerous misinformation. After criticism, the service helped these fringe movements expand. The decision comes a week after Facebook Incorporated said it would remove accounts associated with QAnon, a movement that the FBI has reportedly labeled a domestic terrorism threat. YouTube's ban is an attempt to stamp out the conspiracy without hindering the massive volume of news and political commentary on its service. Rather than a blanket prohibition of QAnon videos or accounts, YouTube is expanding its hate and harassment policies to include conspiracies that justify real-world violence. So very similar to the free speech argument in the United States, which is to say you can say whatever you want as long as you're not yelling fire in a crowded theater, as long as it doesn't justify real-world violence. That, of course, is a very gray area. What is going to justify real-world violence and what isn't? Will algorithms save the day? Will machine learning finally achieve a sort of machine enlightenment where it can really disseminate and understand with high accuracy what will lead to violence and what will not? Back to the article, quote, context matters. So news coverage on these issues or content discussing them without targeting individuals or protected groups may stay up. YouTube, a unit of Alphabet's Incorporated, Google wrote in a blog post. So if you don't target an individual or a protected group, apparently that content is allowed to stay. Technology platforms have released a blitz of new rules to curb misinformation after mounting momentum for movements such as QAnon. So the policing continues on and on and on and on. So there's some gray area here. I think YouTube gets it. I think they are aware of the fact that their algorithms are not strong enough to perfectly maneuver these spaces. Free speech, I would argue, is under attack. Now, that being said, there's a lot of free speech that is garbage. You would probably agree with me with that. There's a lot of hate out there. And so trying to find the yin-yang balance of these things is, of course, part of what makes this life so difficult. LinkedIn Marketing Solutions looks ahead. This is Paul Talbot, the CMO. CMO Network, rather. LinkedIn has staked out a solid position of business-to-business social media leadership, but the extent to which this enviable value proposition for business-to-business marketers can resonate with business-to-customer or B2C marketers remains unclear. Here's an interview with Paul Talbot and Penry Price with LinkedIn. So what's the number one misconception you run into when it comes to LinkedIn marketing solutions? Penry, I see, is I assume he's the CMO. He says, I can share two misconceptions we run into most often: that we are strictly B2B and that we're expensive. So I can touch on that a little bit. We have run LinkedIn ads, obviously. I was promoting this show on LinkedIn for a bit. It is expensive in my experience. Targeting a CEO or a CMO or a specific person is not going to be as cheap as running a Google ad by and large. Now, LinkedIn obviously would disagree with that. So price here. We believe that our greatest opportunity is to help B2B and B2C marketers reach and engage with our more than 706 million professionals to help achieve their growth objectives. On the B2B side, one of our biggest areas of investment is the LinkedIn Audience Network, which helps advertisers extend the reach of their sponsored content campaigns to reach LinkedIn's professional audiences off-platform across a collection of high-quality third-party publishers. So I saw this the other day when I was running a LinkedIn ad, and they basically said, look, if you just want to advertise on LinkedIn, it's going to be much more expensive, was my takeaway. And so I clicked on the audience, not really knowing what it was, but it's just them saying, hey, look, it's a bunch of other third-party publishers. It's helped marketers, back to the article, reach up to 25% more members and achieve up to 9 times more monthly touch points. So I guess one of the problems with reaching more people and more touch points is you get paid per impression, or you're paying for the reach. And so if you reach a whole bunch more people, that doesn't really matter. What really matters, obviously, is conversions. So back to the article, we're also seeing a lot of B2C marketers, especially those that offer higher consideration products like travel and automobiles, come to LinkedIn. I would argue that their main deal is B2B. And in my experience so far, it has not quite yet worked. Doesn't mean that it can't. I actually have a meeting with a LinkedIn representative tomorrow where I'm going to show them the campaign that I ran. Spent about $100, and I got a bunch of views, and that's it. So great reach, great viewership, but who cares? Nobody's clicking, nobody's converting. So I'm going to have a conversation with her just to kind of get a sense of what I personally am missing when it comes to LinkedIn advertising. Mind you, there are members of my team that have more experience in this than I do. So I, for my own personal growth, I'm going to go through a couple of experiments just to understand LinkedIn ads a bit better. Last but not least, Google, Facebook, and Apple in the crosshairs as lawmakers agree on EU intervention in big tech. A position paper from French and Dutch cabinet ministers calls on regulators to take preemptive action. So these are obviously nations that do not own Facebook. Obviously, America doesn't own it either. But there is more of an incentive for Europe to crack down on foreign entities, just like the Trump administration has cracked down on ByteDance and TikTok. 2 European cabinet ministers have called on regulators to take preemptive action against tech giants, including the option of breaking them up in a bid to curb their power and control over the market. Cedric O of France and Mona Keijzer of the Netherlands signed a position paper on Thursday that said intervention targeting gatekeeping online platforms is required to ensure fair competition and that users are treated fairly. Their target is big tech companies like Facebook and Amazon. Let's not forget Amazon, which they said are so dominant that they structurally act as gatekeepers for other platforms and on the use of data. We were just talking today. We have a client who is having a heck of a time getting their Google My Business listing up. They have sent in pictures of the location. They've sent in your insurance documentation. They sent in business licensure documentation. They have taken a photo of them in front of the actual business. And now, I'm not kidding, they are being asked by Google to do a live video where they walk through the establishment. So let me put it to you this way. Let's say that this particular business, I won't mention exactly who they are, would make, I don't know, if the Google My Business listing came up, another $70,000 to $80,000 a month, right? Because that's the amount of traffic that it would generate for them if they could get their Google My Business listing up. Google has almost no incentive to expedite their listing going up. They're just, they're not getting paid if the Google My Business listing goes up. They have an incentive to run more Google ads, but they don't have an incentive to make sure that every one of these listings goes up. And so they wait, and it's slow, and they offshore this sort of work, and you can't talk to the same person more than once. That's very irritating. And in the end, what happens is the listing finally comes up, but is there a check from Google coming for all that lost business? Of course not. Is there any sort of making you whole or making you right if Google says, you know what, you are actually a legitimate business and you deserve to be here? No, of course not. And so this is the problem with a monopoly. Now, if Google is acting perfectly and all of their services work just fine, then it's not that big of a deal. But when there is no alternative, when you can't get a listing up and you've done all the right things, and your only option is to sue them for like back damages or something crazy like that, then you have a problem. You do. It's not like A or B. There's not like half of the market's over here and half of it's over there. It like follows the bell curve. Like they have 80% of it or more. So I get where the EU is coming from. Quote, breaking up these companies isn't an absolute value, but can be ultimately the result of competition control. So we'll see. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it starts in Europe. Why wouldn't it? They have more incentive to break them up. They're not seeing the tax revenue, I would argue, as much as the United States is, and I could argue not here as well. We've all seen the tax loopholes that these giant corporations go through. So I don't know. I'm torn on this. I think that Google and Facebook and Apple, by and large, have changed the cultural face of the earth, and I think that they're going to come up with more incredible things as time progresses. And we don't want to stop them from innovating, but we also want justice and fairness And so it's going to be tricky for Google, Facebook, and Apple to get it right. And they're definitely going to have to fight these battles because the talk of breaking them up has only increased as time has gone by. So we are going to summarize the events of the day here. But before we do, join us for the live show, 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Just type in marketing as a foreign language into YouTube and you'll find us right there. Hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. You'll know when we're live. It's the same time every day. Not that hard. Okay. CEO of Twitter said, you know what? We made a mistake. The mistake he made was not giving context for this tweet about Biden, Ukraine, whatever. I don't think that he regrets banning the accounts per se or not allowing those accounts to proliferate. I think he regrets not giving any context, which is something that Twitter absolutely should do if they're going to ban your account. Facebook, Twitter making a decision to limit the distribution of the Biden story. So if it turns out that the Biden story is right and that there was sort of some funny business, then yes, there's some issues there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Got a couple comments. I got Jim Rossi, totally agree. Ooh, I'm going to have to pop in and see what Jim said. And Esther, who can we trust to make these decisions? They all have our personal information. Yes, they do. Google has been very clear that they just want to eat up all of that data. So back to this point I was trying to make, which was if it is true what the story says about Biden, then Facebook, Twitter have egg on their face because they are basically deciding to reduce the distribution without necessarily knowing all the facts, which is a tricky business and could easily be seen as unethical. That being said, if they are right, well, then they stop the spread of misinformation. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to see. We got Esther Sass coming in saying DOJ just came out and said it was a nothing burger. A nothing burger. Is that exactly what they said, Esther Sass? The DOJ? I hope that's a direct quote. I hope that the DOJ literally said it was a nothing burger. That's my hope. So Kayleigh McEnany gets her Twitter account basically shut down, the press secretary of the United States, which is pretty crazy for reposting this tweet. We'll have to see again what the facts are. I think it's going to take some time to uncover those, but that's a big deal. That is a big deal. YouTube follows Facebook in banning QAnon, but with caveats. Okay, so YouTube pushing forward in the same way that Facebook was. Just yesterday, YouTube was saying that, nope, we're not going to do it. And now they're saying yes, as long as it, quote, justifies real world violence, or at least as if it the post itself justifies real world violence. LinkedIn, yeah, you can check it out. I think for B2B, there are some options there. I've found it to be expensive. I'll let you know more about the meeting I have tomorrow once I chat with a representative there. And then, the EU, I think, is going to attack Google and Facebook and Apple more vociferously than the United States will. But we will have to wait and see what exactly is going to happen there. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for swinging on by the show today. Much appreciated, as always. Join us for the live show, 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow, if you so please. That is the show for today. I think it's time for an outro. Who's with me? Oh, wow. I deleted the outro. You know what the outro is going to be? Oh, there it is. Thanks, Esther Stas. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.